if API authorization date will be written as follows. It will have a date followed by time followed by time zone. Uh, as we have seen here, this is a header. So all dates in HTTP headers are to be represented in RFC 7231 full dates. So full date format is as follows. As we have discussed previously, should have the day of the week followed by date in this format followed by time GMT. So this is the format that is being followed. You'll have day of the week followed by date, month, year, hours, minutes, seconds, followed by GMT. So in post request is optional, get request is optional, delete request is optional. Put request, we are not supposed to use it. So post request is when you're trying to add data on the server. Get request is when you're trying to retrieve data from the server. Delete request is when you uh, want to delete a particular data with a certain ID on the server. And put request is when you want to update a particular data on a server. So we are not supposed to use this header value when we are sending put requests. We are supposed to send this header value only when we sending a post request or a get request or a delete request. So what is XFAP authorization date? This is the time when the payment service user last logged in with the third party payment provider. So let's say you're using PhonePe or Google Pay. XFAP authorization date is the last previously logged in date and time. So that's what that header will have. Next one is XFAP customer IP address. So the payment service user's IP address if the PSU is currently logged in with the TPP. Uh, let's say you're making a payment or you've just logged into your phone pay or Google Pay, then you will have a particular IP address. Whenever you log into your account, you will uh, you will be accessing your Google Pay or Phone Pay through a particular IP address, and that IP address will be stored in XFAPI customer IP address. Again, this is optional when you're sending post requests, get requests, and delete requests, and you're not supposed to send this in the header value when you're sending put requests. Simple. The next one is XFAPI interaction ID. So XFAPI interaction ID uh, is used as a correlation ID. If provided, the ASPSP must play back this value in the XFAPI interaction ID response header. So XFAPI interaction ID is a correlation ID. Um, Again, this is optional. If it is provided, the account servicing payment service provider, the banks in particular, let's say you're using Standard Chartered Bank or Barclays Bank, that bank must play back this value in the XFAPI interaction ID response header. So when you're sending a request uh, through the API with this header value attached, and when the ASPSP receives this request, that the particular ASPSP must uh, play back this value, meaning that it should uh, attach the same value in its response header when it is sending that API response back to you. That's it. So 3 done so far. The next one is authorization. So request header will be authorization. It is a standard HTTP header. It allows credentials to be provided to the authorization resource server depending on the type of resource being requested. So it allows credentials to be provided to the authorization resource server depending on the type of resource to be requested. Excuse me. For OAuth 2.0 OIDC, this comprises the basic bearer authentication schemes. So authorization is when you want to say that I am a particular user, I'm a valid user to your server, the on the ASPSP side or on the TPP side, saying that okay, I am Abhinav, I'm the real person, and for that I will be sending you the authentication schemes and authentication codes to validate that I am that particular user. And as you can see, that is mandatory in all your post requests, post, uh, get, delete, and put requests, because no matter what kind of request that you're sending, that's on the server side, they need to know that the right person is sending it to make particular changes. Content type. So content type is a standard HTTP header. It represents the format of payload that is being provided in the request. So content type will mostly have JSON data, uh, and you will be sending content, any type of content. Let it be like if you want to change particular user ID, or if you want to add, if you want to add a new user, add um a new user, or if you want to add new information about a certain user, something like that. When you're sending it through your put request or your patch, put request or your get, what is this, post request, that's when you add in all your content in the content type header. That's when you add in all the content in your body of your request, and what is the type of content that you have added, that will be mentioned in the content type header. So the content type will, uh, it was generally set to application slash JSON here, and what the regulation states is that this must be set to application slash JSON except for the endpoints that support content type other than application slash JSON. So what they recommend is that you send JSON type data in your request body most of the times. But if you are, if there is a particular request that when you were not able to send JSON type data. For example, when you send post file payment consents consent ID slash file, this is when you might not send JSON type data. Then the ASPSP must specify the available options on the developer portals. So whatever other options are there, the ASPSP will specify, and you can choose that and then send. Uh, for encrypted requests, you must always send it. Uh, you must always set this header to application slash JOS plus JWE for encrypted requests. The TPP may provide additional information, example, a Q value and a car set. If set to any other value, the ASPSP must respond with a 415 unsupported media type. This is important again. So when the content type is set incorrectly, and if you send a request with an incorrectly set content type header, the ASPSP, which is your account servicing payment service provider, like the bank side, it will respond with a HTTP response, which is a 415 unsupported media type response. So here for post request, it is mandatory. For get request, we do not use content type. For delete requests, we do not use content type. For patch requests or for put requests, it is mandatory that you send the content type. So whenever you're sending information in your request body, you need to specify the content type in your header. So when do you send? You generally send information in your request body only when you're making uh, adding new users, which is the uh, post request, or when you're trying to update particular data that is already there on the server, which is the patch or the put request. So only in those two scenarios, it is mandatory to use your content type header. Okay, we will finish off with the headers, and then we'll finish off the request headers, and we'll continue the next video, the response headers. Accept. So HTTP header, standard HTTP header determines the content type that is required for the from the server. So accept is another header. It is a standard HTTP header, and it determines the content type that is required from the server. Okay, let's read through it. Uh, if the TPP expects an unencrypted response, it must indicate that only a JSON response is accepted. Example, by setting a value to application/JSON as a content header for all endpoints that respond with a JSON. Um, so we're looking at the accept response header, request header, sorry. Yeah, we're looking at request headers, which is the accept request header. And the accept request header is again a standard HTTP header. It determines the content type that is required from the server. So it determines the content type that is required from the server. So if the TPP expects an unencrypted response, it must indicate the only that the only that a JSON response is accepted. That only a JSON response is accepted. Example, by setting the value to application/JSON as a content header for all endpoints that respond with JSON. So uh, this header will determine the content type that is required from the server. So when you're sending a request and you're expecting a response to have a certain type of content type, this header will determine or will state to the server that, okay, your server, you're supposed to provide me with this type of content when you're sending the response. So generally, if the TPP expects an unencrypted response, it must indicate that only a JSON response is accepted. Example, by setting the value to application/JSON. So if accept is set to application/JSON, then the server must uh, respond by sending its content type in application/JSON format, which is a JSON format, as content header for all endpoints that respond with JSON. If the TPP expects an encrypted response, so if you want a JSON with an encrypted response, it must indicate that only a JWT response is accepted. Example, by setting the value to application/JOSC plus JWE as content header for all endpoints that respond with JSON. For endpoints that do not respond with JSON, which is example gets dot dot slash statement id slash file, meaning that when the response uh, okay, the ASPSP must specify the available options on their developer portals. So for example, this get request will not respond with the JSON formatted file. Then the ASPSP should specify what are the other options that are available on their developer portals. The TPP may provide additional information, example, a queue value and car set. Uh, So if in case the accept value is not set appropriately according to the rules that are mentioned so far, that we have mentioned so far, um, then the ASPSP must respond with a HTTP response of 406 not acceptable. So 406 not acceptable will be sent if we send any incorrect uh, incorrectly set accept header. If it is not specified, if the accept header is not specified, the default is generally application/JSON. The next one is X idempotency key. So X idempotency key is a custom HTTP header. It it is a unique request identifier to support idempotency. So we have seen what idempotency is somewhere here. What is idempotency? So from a RESTful service standpoint, for an application to be idempotent, clients can make the same call repeatedly while producing the same result. Meaning that if client makes the same call over and over again, the server must give you the same response for that particular client call over and over again. So that's what's written here. In other words, making multiple identical requests will have the same effect as making a single request. So that's what idempotency is. So in the X idempotency key, custom HTTP header unique request identifier to support idempotency. So whenever you send this header, you are asking the server to support idempotency. So when you're asking the server to support idempotency, you're basically telling the server, okay, server, when I send you a particular request again and again, you're supposed to send the same response for that particular request again and again, the same identical response that you sent the first time. Uh, so what is the next one? This is mandatory for post requests to idempotent resource endpoints. So this X idempotency key header is mandatory for post request. Post request is when you want to add new data to a particular resource on the server side. It must not be specified for other requests. Yeah, so this is only for post request, and you're not supposed to use it for get, put, or delete requests. The next one is XJWS signature. So this header will contain a detached JWS signature of the body of the payload. Very simple. And if you okay, this documentation will have when this header must be specified. So for this is for in case of get request, it's API specific. For uh, delete, it's API specific. For only for put, it's mandatory. For post, get, and delete, it's API specific. X customer user agent. Um, so this header indicates the user agent that the PSU is using. So uh, let's say that payment PSU is your payment service user. So it can be me or any at the end the end person that is making the payment or receiving the payment. So this header indicates the user agent. Okay, what is user agent? The TPP may populate this field with the user agent indicated by the PSU. Okay, the TPP will take care of this user agent header. So the TPP might have particular codes for each user or each payment service user, and the TPP might populate whatever code is there that the TPP has assigned to each payment service user. So if the payment service user is using a TPP mobile app, let's say Google Pay or Phone Pay, then that TPP must ensure that the user agent string is different from browser based agent strings. So TPP should assign different user agents when payments are being made via the browser, uh, and different user agent strings when payments are being made via a mobile app. This header field is optional for all cases for post, get, delete, and put. That's it for now. We'll continue on in the next video. Thank you.